Finally, this evening, we're remembering superstar Kenny Rogers, the man they called the Gambler. Kevin Tibbles has a look back at this legendary career.
In the country music world,
it's always a little hard to watch someone you've known forever start to fade away. That was how it felt with Kenny Rogers, the legendary Gambler, whose voice and silver beard felt like old friends to millions. For over 60 years, he was everywhere, on the radio.
Breaking news overnight. This is sad news for country music lovers. Kenny Rogers has died. Now, according to his representative, the three-time Grammy Award winner had been under hospice care and died of natural causes in his Georgia home last night.
The stage, in our homes. But in his final years, Kenny quietly stepped back from the spotlight, trading the bright lights for a slower, more private life. Worse, his final days will break your heart. Fading lights and cancer. In 2015, Rogers announced his retirement, saying he wanted to spend more time with his family, especially his twin sons, Justin and Jordan. It felt like a peaceful send-off. After all, he'd given the world more than his fair share of hits, from Lucille to Islands in the Stream. But behind the scenes, his health was starting to slip. Quietly, almost without notice, the showman who had once commanded stadiums began to withdraw from public life. By 2018, fans began to worry. Rogers canceled the remaining shows of his farewell tour, citing a series of health challenges. What many didn't know at the time was that he had been battling bladder cancer, a condition that would eventually claim his life. He was rarely seen in public after that. The few photos that did emerge showed a much thinner, frailer man, barely recognizable from the strong-voiced icon fans had grown up with. As the COVID-19 pandemic swept across the globe in early 2020, Kenny's condition worsened. With health systems overwhelmed and public health risks at an all-time high, his care was moved to hospice. He was surrounded by family at his Georgia home, far from the crowds and cameras. For someone who'd spent a lifetime performing in the spotlight, his final days were heartbreakingly quiet. When the news of his passing broke on March 20th, 2020, it didn't just feel like the end of a life, it felt like the end of an era. The outpouring of grief was immediate and overwhelming. Country stars, pop singers, and millions of fans took to social media to share what Kenny's music had meant to them. But what struck many the most was how private and solemn his final moments had been. There were no big tributes, no farewell tour finale, just a man slipping away gently, his story nearing its final verse. It's a painful truth. Sometimes the most powerful voices go silent, not with a bang, but with a whisper. Kenny Rogers spent his last days in peace, far from the stage lights, surrounded by the people who mattered most. It was a quiet goodbye from a man who had once lived loud, and that contrast only deepens the ache of his absence. The Gambler. Before the world came to know him as the Gambler, before the Grammy Awards, the duets with Dolly, and the countless sold-out arenas, Kenny Rogers was just a kid from Houston, trying to make sense of a hard life and a head full of dreams. To understand the quiet man who slipped away in 2020, we have to rewind the story to the beginning, when everything was still uncertain and raw. Kenny was born in 1938, the fourth of 8 children in a working-class family. His father, a carpenter, struggled with alcoholism, and the Rogers household was no stranger to hardship. Money was always tight. Kenny often talked about how his family lived in a federal housing project, and how even as a child he felt the weight of wanting more. Not just financially, but artistically. In a 2012 interview, he recalled how he didn't just dream of success, he needed it. "I knew I was meant to do something big," he once said. "I just didn't know what it was yet." Music found him early. As a teenager at Jefferson Davis High School, he formed his first band, the Scholars, and got a taste of local fame. They weren't changing the world, but they were getting gigs and making records. And that was more than most kids his age could say. What really set Kenny apart, though, was his voice. Deep, husky, and unmistakably soulful. It didn't quite fit the clean-cut pop standards of the time, but it stood out, and that would make all the difference. In the late 50s, Kenny dipped into jazz with a group called the Bobby Doyle Trio. He played stand-up bass and sang, honing his musical chops and learning the ins and outs of the business. He was never afraid to shift styles, a trait that would come to define his career. But back then, he was still figuring things out. Country, R&B, rock, folk. He dabbled in all of them, like a musical shapeshifter in search of his final form. That hunger to evolve, to survive, would follow him throughout his life. The road from Houston's housing projects to the top of the charts wasn't straight, and it wasn't easy. But Kenny Rogers was never the kind to quit. And soon, that restless, genre-blending spirit would lead him to his first major breakthrough, and the band that would change everything. Rise to stardom. The journey from garage band gigs to global superstardom doesn't usually happen overnight, and it certainly didn't for Kenny Rogers. By the late 60s, he was a seasoned performer, but not yet a household name. That all changed when he joined a psychedelic rock band with a long name and a short fuse, Kenny Rogers and the First Edition. The First Edition was unlike anything Rogers had done before. With their flashy style, experimental sound, and boundary-pushing lyrics, they were a reflection of their time, wild, weird, and electric. Kenny's deep, growling voice was front and center in their breakout hit. Just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in, a trippy, surreal track that climbed into the top 10 in 1968. It was a far cry from the country ballads that would later define him, but it proved something crucial. Kenny Rogers had range. He could sing anything and make you believe it. The First Edition enjoyed a string of hits and even had their own TV show for a while, but by 1975, the band had run its course. Tastes were changing, and so was Kenny. At age 37, an age when many artists are already on the downswing, he launched his solo career. A lot of people thought he was crazy, but then came Lucille. Released in 1977, Lucille was a revelation. It told the simple but powerful story of a man meeting a married woman in a bar, only to be confronted by her broken-hearted husband. The song was country at its core, but its soulful delivery and sharp storytelling helped it cross into the pop charts, earning Kenny his first Grammy. Suddenly, the man who had once been a psychedelic bass player was now the face of a new kind of country music, one that spoke to everyone, not just rural America. And then, in 1978, he gambled big and won. The Gambler, written by Don Schlitz and offered to several other artists before landing with Kenny, became his defining anthem. With its memorable chorus and life as a card game metaphor, the song wasn't just a hit, it was a philosophy. You gotta know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em, became an instant catchphrase, part of the American lexicon. The track earned Rogers another Grammy, spawned a series of TV movies, and sealed his reputation as a master storyteller. From there, the hits just kept rolling. She Believes in Me, Coward of the County, Lady, written by Lionel Richie. Through the years, each song layered new dimensions onto Kenny's persona. He was the gambler, the lover, the outlaw, the everyman. His gravelly voice carried wisdom, weariness, and warmth all at once. But one of the most iconic chapters in his career came through duets, particularly with his longtime friend and musical soulmate, Dolly Parton. Their 1983 hit, Islands in the Stream, became one of the best-selling duets of all time, showcasing the perfect chemistry between the two legends. Their friendship, filled with flirtatious banter and deep mutual respect, became a beloved part of country music history. Audiences couldn't get enough of them, and their performances felt like magic, genuine, unscripted, and joyful. Rogers knew exactly how to read an audience. He never chased trends. He absorbed them, filtered them through his unique lens, and gave people something familiar yet fresh. That's how he managed to dominate country charts while still appealing to pop radio, television audiences, and even Vegas crowds. In an industry that often thrives on categorization, Kenny Rogers refused to stay in a box. By the mid-'80s, he wasn't just a country singer. He was a global superstar. His albums sold in the tens of millions. His face was everywhere. He was hosting specials, making cameos, and before long, moving into yet another arena altogether, acting and entrepreneurship. But before we get there, it's worth pausing to ask, how did a kid from the Houston projects end up becoming a multimedia mogul with a voice that defined generations? The answer lies in more than just the music. It lies in Kenny Rogers, the entertainer. Beyond music. By the 80s, Kenny Rogers was no longer just a country music star. He was a full-blown entertainment icon. His voice had taken him to the top of the charts, but it was his presence, charm, and relentless curiosity that carried him far beyond the recording studio. Kenny wasn't content with being a singer. He was a storyteller, a performer, and above all, a man who knew how to turn talent into an empire. Let's start with his foray into television and film. Riding the massive success of his 1978 hit, The Gambler, Rogers starred in a made-for-TV movie of the same name in 1980. The film, which featured Kenny as the seasoned card shark Brady Hawks, became a surprise hit, and so did Kenny's performance. He wasn't just playing a part, he was the character. Over the next 15 years, he reprised the role in 4 sequels, building a fan-favorite mini-franchise that brought his music and persona to a whole new audience. The films were simple, often sentimental, but they worked, just like Kenny's songs. He also appeared in other movies like Coward of the County, based on another of his hit songs, and even did a guest stint on Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. While no one mistook him for a classically trained actor, Kenny had something more important: likability. When he was on screen, you wanted to watch. Whether he was cracking a half smile at the poker table or singing a heartfelt ballad around a campfire, he radiated a kind of steady warmth that made people feel at home. But Kenny didn't stop with the stage and screen. He had business ambitions too. In the early 90s, he co-founded Kenny Rogers Roasters, a chain of rotisserie chicken restaurants launched alongside former KFC exec John Y. Brown Jr. It was a bold move. The chain quickly grew in popularity, known for its wood-fired chicken and home-style sides. Though it eventually shrank in the U.S., it found long-term success in Asia, where several locations still operate today. And, fun fact, Kenny Rogers Roasters even got a hilarious nod in a classic Seinfeld episode, where Kramer becomes obsessed with the chicken across the street. Kenny was also an accomplished photographer, something many fans didn't even realize. What started as a hobby turned into a legitimate second career. He published several photography books, including Your Friends and Mine, and Kenny Rogers, This Is My Country, capturing candid portraits of celebrities, rural landscapes, and quiet moments that showed his deep appreciation for beauty and storytelling beyond lyrics. Not one to hoard his success, Kenny was also committed to giving back. He contributed to countless charities, hosted benefit concerts, and supported causes ranging from children's hospitals to disaster relief. He worked with organizations like the Red Cross and USA for Africa and helped raise millions for those in need. He once said that if you're lucky enough to do well in life, it's your responsibility to give back. And he meant it. Whether it was food, film, photos, or philanthropy, Kenny Rogers had an uncanny ability to connect. He brought sincerity to everything he touched, and that made him trustworthy, a rare quality in the world of celebrity. He didn't chase fame for its own sake. He built his legacy brick by brick, with a quiet confidence and a relentless curiosity that made him much more than a man with a guitar. And yet, even as his empire grew, the public still knew him best for the stories he sang and for the real, often complex man behind those stories. Fortune behind the fame. Kenny Rogers wasn't just a talented singer and storyteller, he was also a savvy businessman who built a substantial financial empire over the decades. By the time he passed, his net worth was estimated at around $250 million, a testament to a career that stretched far beyond hit records and sold-out tours. His wealth was the product of multiple streams of income. Naturally, his music royalties formed a solid foundation. With over 120 million records sold worldwide, and hits that continue to be streamed, covered, and licensed for commercials and films, the money from his catalog alone was enormous and continues to generate revenue even after his passing. But Kenny was never content to rely solely on his music. He was an early pioneer in artist entrepreneurship, recognizing that the entertainment industry was volatile and that diversifying income was essential. In the 90s, he co-founded Kenny Rogers Roasters, a chain of rotisserie chicken restaurants that expanded quickly and brought him business success in a whole new arena. Although the brand eventually scaled back in the US, it thrived internationally, particularly in Asia, adding a lucrative dimension to his portfolio. Rogers also made smart investments in real estate and media, and he owned his own publishing rights, a movie that gave him greater control over his music and earnings, a benefit many artists never fully realize. Despite amassing such wealth, Kenny avoided the trappings of excess. He was known for his humility, often dressing simply and living modestly compared to many in the celebrity world. His focus remained on family, philanthropy, and creating lasting art rather than flaunting riches. Financial stability allowed Kenny to retire on his own terms. In his later years, he stepped away from constant touring and the public eye, choosing to spend his time with his wife Wanda and their twin boys. This peace and privacy were luxuries made possible by the financial foresight and hard work he put into building a lasting legacy, one that extended far beyond music into business, philanthropy, and personal fulfillment. A man of many faces. For all his fame, fortune, and flawless stage presence, Kenny Rogers was, at his core, just a man searching for connection, like the rest of us. Beneath the chart-topping hits and the silver-bearded smile was someone who lived a complicated, colorful personal life. He wasn't shy about it either. Kenny often spoke openly about his regrets, his marriages, and the lessons he learned along the way. Let's talk about those marriages, all 5 of them. Kenny himself joked about his love life more than once, saying, "I've been married 5 times, and I've finally learned how to do it right." His early marriages, especially during his rise to fame, struggled under the weight of constant touring and the pressure of stardom. He admitted he was often more focused on his career than on nurturing his relationships. "Music was always first," he once said. "That doesn't leave much room for anything else." But in 1997, something shifted. He married Wanda Miller, a woman 28 years his junior, and by all accounts, it was different this time. They were together for over 2 decades, proving the skeptics wrong. Wanda wasn't just his wife. She was his partner, his caregiver during his final years, and the anchor he always seemed to be searching for. Kenny credited her with helping him find peace, balance, and the kind of love that didn't need to be performed for the cameras. Together, they welcomed twin boys, Justin and Jordan, in 2004, when Kenny was 65. Becoming a father again late in life changed him profoundly. He softened, he slowed down, and he made decisions, like retiring from touring, that prioritized family over fame. He often said that raising the twins gave him a second chance at the kind of fatherhood he had missed with his older children from previous marriages. You could see the joy in his face whenever he talked about them. It wasn't just pride, it was gratitude. Despite his many successes, Kenny never pretended he was perfect. He spoke openly about his struggles with aging, his past mistakes, and the pain that sometimes came with fame. He acknowledged that he had missed out on important family moments because he was chasing the next big show or the next hit song. In interviews later in life, you could hear the reflection in his voice, the humility of a man who had lived, learned, and come out the other side with a clearer sense of what really mattered. And then there was his deep sense of faith. Kenny wasn't one to preach, but he carried a quiet spirituality with him. He believed in purpose, in timing, in second chances. He saw music as a form of ministry, not in a religious sense, but as a way to connect, heal, and tell the truth. That's probably why his songs hit so deeply. They weren't just catchy, they were human. So yes, Kenny Rogers wore many hats: superstar, businessman, actor, photographer. But in the quiet moments, the ones away from the microphones and cameras, he was a husband, a father, a man who knew heartbreak and joy, and who found peace later in life after decades of searching. And when he finally stepped away from the spotlight, he left behind not just a collection of hits, but a deeply personal legacy that reflected the full, complex man behind the music. The legacy he left behind. When Kenny Rogers passed away in March 2020, it felt like a chapter had closed, not just in country music, but in American culture. His voice had been a constant companion for generations, from honky-tonks to high-rises, from vinyl to streaming playlists. His songs were woven into everyday life. But Kenny's true legacy runs deeper than chart numbers or ticket sales. It's about the emotional imprint he left behind. Start with the numbers, though, and they're staggering. Kenny sold over 120 million records worldwide, making him one of the best-selling artists of all time. He racked up multiple Grammy Awards, CMA Awards, and American Music Awards, along with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Country Music Association in 2013. He was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame that same year, an honor he said meant more to him than any other. But Kenny's greatest achievement wasn't the trophies. It was his ability to transcend genre, geography, and even generations. His music wasn't just country or pop, it was storytelling. He sang about gamblers and broken hearts, young love and second chances, family legacies and quiet regrets. These weren't just songs, they were life lessons, wrapped in melodies you couldn't forget. The Gambler alone could serve as a metaphorical guidebook for life. Know when to hold 'em, know when to fold 'em. Wasn't just about cards. It was about knowing your limits, picking your battles, and living with intention. That's why the song endured. It wasn't flashy or overproduced, it was honest, like Kenny himself. When the news of his death hit the headlines, tributes poured in from every corner of the entertainment world. Dolly Parton, his longtime friend and duet partner, posted a tearful video saying, "My heart is broken. I loved Kenny with all my heart. My heart is broken." Country stars like Reba McEntire, Blake Shelton, and Brad Paisley shared their grief. Even artists outside the genre, from Lionel Richie to Chance the Rapper, spoke up about how Kenny's music had touched them. Fans, too, flooded social media with memories, stories about first dances to Through the Years, road trips scored by Lucille, and family sing-alongs to Islands in the Stream. His music had marked people's lives, often in small but lasting ways. That's what real legacy looks like, not just being remembered, but being felt. And even now, Kenny's influence can still be heard in the voices of modern artists who blend country with soul, pop, and rock. Stars like Chris Stapleton, Casey Musgraves, and Luke Combs carry echoes of that same genre-blurring spirit. Kenny helped tear down the wall between country and mainstream, opening doors for those who followed. He made country cool without watering it down. He made it human. Beyond the music, his charitable work left an impact, too. He wasn't loud about it, but he gave generously to music education programs, healthcare efforts, and children's charities. He once helped build a school in Atlanta. He sang for causes he believed in, and he used his fame to lift others up without expecting applause. Kenny Rogers didn't need to dominate headlines or chase viral moments. He built something far more durable, a body of work rooted in sincerity, soul, and timeless truth. His voice was instantly recognizable. But even more powerful was the way he made you feel, like you knew him, like he knew you. And in the end, that's the kind of legacy that never fades. The quiet goodbye. Kenny Rogers lived his life in full color. Bright stage lights, platinum records, roaring crowds, and timeless duets. Yet the end of his journey wasn't marked by fanfare or a dramatic curtain call. It came quietly, in the early days of a global pandemic, far from the arenas and flashing cameras that had defined his decades-long career. And maybe that's the most poetic ending he could have asked for. In March 2020, the world was just beginning to shut down. Flights were being grounded. Events were canceled. Cities went quiet. And so did Kenny. He passed away in hospice care, surrounded by his loved ones, in a calm Georgia home that was filled not with applause, but with peace. There was no final concert, no dramatic farewell tour, just a quiet goodbye from a man who had already said everything he needed to say, through song, through story, and through a voice that had become a part of our collective memory. His death was officially attributed to natural causes, though it was widely known he had been battling bladder cancer. The pandemic meant that public memorials had to be delayed or canceled altogether, making the goodbye feel even more distant for fans who wanted one more moment with him. It was heartbreaking, yes, but oddly fitting. Kenny, always one to let the song speak louder than the singer, bowed out gracefully, as if whispering his final lyric. And yet, in that stillness, his legacy only grew louder. People around the world dusted off old vinyl records, streamed his greatest hits, and played The Gambler like it was gospel. Tributes flowed in from fans of all ages, people who had grown up with his music, fallen in love to his duets, and weathered heartbreak with his ballads as their soundtrack. Suddenly, the man who had stepped away so quietly was being remembered everywhere, from bar jukeboxes in Texas to BBC specials in London. His songs filled living rooms and car rides, bringing comfort in uncertain times. In a world spinning with chaos, there was something grounding about Kenny Rogers' music. It reminded us of simpler truths: love, loss, luck, regret, redemption. He didn't write every song he sang, but he chose each one carefully, like a storyteller picking the next chapter. His greatest strength was not just his voice, but the way he made you feel like he understood yours. Even now, years after his passing, his songs remain stitched into the fabric of American life. Lady, Lucille, Coward of the County. Through the years, and of course, The Gambler, they still find their way into weddings, funerals, road trips, and quiet evenings alone. His voice was never perfect in a technical sense, but it carried something rarer: character. He sounded like experience, like wisdom, like someone who had seen the hard parts of life and lived to tell the tale with just the right mix of grit and grace. Beyond the hits, Kenny Rogers also leaves behind a cultural blueprint for what it means to evolve while staying true to yourself. He wasn't afraid to take risks. He moved from doo-wop to jazz to country to pop and back again without losing his identity. He did duets with everyone from Dottie West to Sheena Easton. He acted. He opened a chicken restaurant. He published photography books. He lived a life so full, it could have spanned several lifetimes. But perhaps what people will remember most is not the success. It's the humility. Despite all the fame, Kenny never seemed to carry an ego. He often laughed at himself in interviews. He talked openly about his failures and flaws. He admitted when he didn't get it right, and he gave credit where it was due. That kind of honesty is rare, especially in the entertainment world. And it's probably why he was so loved. Not just admired, but genuinely loved. And that love was a two-way street. Kenny appreciated his fans deeply. Even in his final years, as his health declined, he made an effort to connect. He didn't chase trends or force himself back into the spotlight. He let his body of work speak for him. That's something only a truly confident artist can do. Walk away knowing you've already said enough. Now, years after his final note faded, his voice still echoes. Not in a haunting way, but like an old friend stopping by to remind you that life is messy, beautiful, unpredictable, and worth every moment. In a world that moves too fast, Kenny Rogers offered something timeless. A pause, a story, a melody that still lingers long after the music stops. There's a reason people still quote The Gambler. It's not just about cards. It's about knowing your place in the world, accepting what you can't control, and choosing your moments with care. That philosophy wasn't just a lyric. It was how Kenny lived his life. And it's how he left it too, quietly, gracefully, on his own terms. And maybe that's the lesson he left us with, not just in music, but in life. Know when to hold on, know when to let go, and always leave a legacy worth remembering. So, here's to Kenny Rogers, a gambler, a gentleman, a storyteller, and a soul who knew that sometimes the most powerful goodbyes are the ones whispered, not shouted. He may be gone, but the songs and the stories will always carry on. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for many more.